Hey, before we begin, a quick note. The stories on this channel are based on real cases, but the names of the people involved have been changed, and graphic or violent language has been filtered out. With that said, let's open the file. When the neighbors found the house that morning, every curtain was drawn. Every mirror in the building had been covered with a sheet or cloth, and on the face of each of the 8 people inside, someone had placed a piece of fabric, as if tucking each one in for a very long sleep. They had not done this to themselves. This is a real case. Only the names have been changed. It happened on a Sunday night in June of 1912 in a small farming town in Iowa, in a house we will call the Thorne residence. The Thorne family was the kind of ordinary that makes a story like this feel particularly wrong. Caleb Thorne ran a hardware store in the center of town and was known to most of its residents. His wife Ruth kept the house. They had 4 children: Howard, who was 11, Clara 10, Eddie 7, and George, who was 5. They were known around town. People waved when Caleb drove through. Ruth was involved in the church. The children walked to school every morning. On the evening in question, a Sunday, the family had attended a children's program at their church. The program ran late into the evening, and when it ended, Caleb walked home with the children along the familiar streets. On the way, a decision was made. The Rusk daughters, Elsie and Nora, ages 12 and 8, would come along and spend the night. Their parents agreed. Elsie and Nora had stayed with the Thornes before. It was the kind of arrangement that happens constantly in a small town without any thought. By midnight, all 8 people in that house were unalived. The call came the next morning from a neighbor. Something was wrong in the silence. The usual sounds of a household waking had not come. A Sunday paper sat uncollected on the step. When the door was open, every curtain inside was drawn against the light. The 8 had been found in their beds. None of them had left their rooms. There was no sign in the house that anyone had moved in alarm or confusion in the night. The method had been a woodsman's axe, taken from the property itself, and the investigators believed it had been used quickly, room by room, before anyone had the chance to cry out and wake the others. The work had been quiet. The walls between the rooms were thin. The work had still been quiet. There were details that made no immediate sense. Someone had gone through the entire house and covered every mirror. Every single one, without exception, had been hung with cloth. The faces of all 8 were arranged the same way, a piece of fabric laid across each. Every window curtain was drawn shut, and every door between certain rooms had been pulled closed. The axe had been wiped and left behind. The family's savings were in the house and were untouched. This was not disorder. Whatever happened here was done deliberately, and then arranged with care. And then there was the lamp. In one of the upstairs rooms sat a kerosene lamp, its chimney darkly stained. No one in the Thorne household owned that lamp. No one in the investigation could account for where it had come from. Whoever had brought it into the house had carried it in themselves, used it for something in that room, and left it behind when they went. The attic hatch, above the main rooms, showed signs of occupation. Investigators found 2 dried corn cobs on the attic floor, placed as if someone had sat and used them to pass the time. A cigarette end was found nearby. These were not things the family stored in their attic. The attic was reached through a hatch from inside the house. The theory most careful researchers have settled on is that whoever did this was already in the house before the Thorne family returned from church that evening. They waited in the dark above the rooms while the family came home, settled the children, put them to bed. They listened through the floorboards until the house went quiet. Then they came down. The Rusk girls had not been planned. They were an invitation made on a sidewalk after a church program. If the evening had gone slightly differently, if Caleb had simply said goodnight at the corner and walked on, Elsie and Nora would have gone home to their own beds. That detail has stayed with every person who has studied this case. The investigation went on for more than a decade and produced nothing firm. Over 100 suspects were named and examined. An itinerant minister with a history of unusual behavior confessed in considerable detail, but when the confession was examined, it fell apart, and he later recanted it. A local businessman who had recently had a falling out with Caleb was investigated at length and cleared. Researchers studying crimes in the Midwest during the same period have pointed to at least 3 other unalived households in the region with overlapping details: covered faces, drawn curtains, the weapon left behind at the scene, savings untouched. No prosecutor was ever able to draw those threads into a case. The house still stands. It draws visitors from some distance. People walk through the rooms, which have been kept roughly as they were found. The upstairs is quiet. The attic hatch is still there. What has never been explained is the lamp. It did not belong to any member of the family. It could not be matched to any neighboring household. In over a century of examination, its origin has never been established. Whoever carried it into the Thorne house on that Sunday night brought it deliberately, used it for something upstairs, and left without it. Covered mirrors, faces arranged, curtains drawn tight, a lamp that belonged to no one. These are not the actions of someone surprised or rushed. Someone had enough time to do all of it, slowly and carefully, before walking out into the June night. In the morning, when the neighbor came and opened the door, the house was cold and still. The curtains were shut. Every mirror was covered. And somewhere in the ceiling above, the rooms where 8 people would not wake again, 2 corncobs sat on the attic floor, exactly where someone had left them the night before, waiting in the dark. Most of these cases never close. If you want to sit with the ones that don't, subscribe. There's a new file every few days.